Very excited for this. This is Valor's very first thesis defense. Is that correct? That's correct. Yeah, the very first thesis defense, and I'm so excited. I got to speak to you in chapel last week, and I told you that we want students of Valor to be three things. Anybody remember the first one? It's 3 S's. It makes it slightly easier to remember. Serve God. Now I remind you the first one. Who remembers the second one? Stand firm. That's the third one. Yeah, here we go. Now we got the bread on both sides. And what's the one right in the middle there? Anyone remember? Seek wisdom. Seek wisdom. And Phoebe has been a marvelous example in writing this thesis of seeking wisdom, which begins with the fear of the Lord. It's central to her whole thesis. I hope your students will be inspired by her example. This thesis is really impressive. You've been working on it for a whole year, Phoebe. You did some research over the summer, continued work on it through the whole school year, and this thesis is really impressive. One of our panelists has actually sat on the panel of other classical schools that have seniors defend theses, and told me this morning that it's one of the best they've ever seen. I haven't seen other high school senior theses, but I can tell you I'm sure impressed with this one, and I'm excited for her to defend it. I'm impressed with her depth of thinking and her research. So in other words, the logic of the thesis is important and impressive. And then, you know, it's a classical school, so we go from logic to rhetoric. I hope you get to read her thesis sometime. If you haven't, you should ask for a copy. I'd get you one. And the height of rhetoric is not only to be able to write out what you think on paper, but then to be able to defend it. Hence, we've got a panel here to ask Phoebe questions this morning so that she has to defend the thesis. So here's what you can expect. In a moment, I'm going to invite Phoebe up, and she's going to give a 2 or 3 minute kind of abstract, an explanation. What is her thesis all about? And then Mrs. Thorne's going to start by asking her a few questions. And then the rest of our panelists will ask her questions, and she'll defend her thesis and explain more of what she thinks. Students, I hope that you'll be inspired by her example of seeking wisdom, and you'll be a good audience. You'll listen to her, give her your eyes and pay attention. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to introduce these panelists and pray. You all know Mrs. Thorne, the head of School for Valor Classical Academy. Next to her is Clint Manley, a man I'm very thankful to get to count a good friend, a church member at Christ the King Church, and an editor at desiringgod.org. I think that's right. I read it often enough, but I don't look at the URL. Abigail Dodds, also someone I'm happy to count a friend, a church member at our church, and author of Atypical Woman and Bread of Life. Did I miss one? And some more coming out that I'm excited for. And then Levi Seaport, one of the members of our board, pastor at Christ Bible Church. Let me pray, and then Phoebe, I'll have you come up. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your will be done, and your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, everything we need for this moment. Forgive us our trespasses. Lead us not into temptation. And in this thesis and its defense, would you please let the wisdom of your word and your Son be clear to our students. We ask this in the name of Christ the King. Amen. Thanks, Phoebe.
We live in a world struggling with purposelessness, meaninglessness, and a loss of identity. And yet our culture constantly promotes self-introspection, self-care, and looking within yourself for answers. Despite this, anxiety is rising, depression is rising, and we are one of the most anxious and depressed generations ever. Why is this? As I looked further into this issue, I stumbled across Carl Trueman's definition of it, and he calls this the postmodern meaning crisis. Essentially, I would define this as a shift from a God-centered world to to a man-centered world, a shift from cosmic, imaginative, and sacred thinking to material, mechanical, and self-created meaning. Meaning used to be discovered, and now meaning is created. My curiosity and interest in this problem led me to C.S. Lewis, as I wanted a solution, something tangible and inspiring. Now, Lewis was an imaginative thinker. He was a literary thinker, and he understood modernity and the medieval worldview very well. His belief in reality I would define as sacramental, and I believe that his view of a sacramental reality offers a solution to the postmodern meaning crisis. So what is a sacramental reality? I would define this as visible things pointing to invisible realities. And I want to give you an example that's universal across time, space, and culture. Think about the last sunset that you watched. Whether it was at the beach, in the mountains, or just simply at your house, try to remember the beautiful colors, the pinks and oranges blending together perfectly in the sky as if a painter had been painting it there. The world seems to grow quieter, almost inviting you to stop and gaze at its beauty. And as the sun slowly dips below the horizon, you realize how fleeting time truly is. Now, did that make you long for something? See, that right there, I would say, is visible beauty pointing you towards invisible meaning. Everything visible points beyond itself, and that is what I would define as a sacramental reality. In my thesis, I decided to go into the three transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty. And I want to explain how the world views these, how Lewis views these, and how Lewis's view of truth, goodness, and beauty solves the postmodern meaning crisis. So first is truth. In a world where the phrase "my truth" is used commonly, truth is seen as subjective, and truth is based on feelings. Lewis views truth as objective, and he says it's rooted in God's word, and that it cannot be created internally. In his book, The Screwtape Letters, Lewis explains that even demons believe in objective truth, and their desire is to constantly confuse and obscure this truth to humans. Although this book is just an imaginary dialogue between demons, I believe this confusion presented by Lewis, clearly observed in so many young people, can be clearly observed in so many young people today, living by the motto, "my truth." As if you live by this motto, your emotions change, your desires can change, and ultimately, what is truth? I believe that truth is sacramental as we pray to an invisible divine creator who gives us grace and allows us to surrender to truth, as truth is not always easy to surrender to. And I believe that Lewis's view of truth solves the postmodern meaning crisis because truth unites people, truth anchors people, and it moves us away from individualism. Next is goodness. In The Abolition of Man, Lewis describes a reality in which man rejects any moral goodness. This man is ruled by his feelings, impulses, and desires, or his belly, and he is also ruled by his intellect and reason, his head, with no way to truly connect the two. Lewis responds with this idea of no moral goodness by saying that goodness is objective, and that it is written into reality and written into our hearts. He demonstrates this in a couple of ways. First is in The Abolition of Man, through the Tao, which is a universal moral law that is an invisible source of moral goodness. He also demonstrates this in the Chronicles of Narnia, in the deep magic. This is something that's always existed, and that is moral order beyond the humans or the characters in the story. I believe that this view of goodness solves the postmodern meaning crisis because goodness no longer needs invention. Moral order already exists. It is written into our universe, and it is written into our hearts. We were born with a desire to participate in goodness, and in something greater than ourselves. And God's goodness is the greatest good. Next and lastly is beauty. And I believe that beauty ties both of these together, as beauty often reaches people emotionally before truth reaches them intellectually. Lewis viewed beauty as a signpost to something else. He believed that beauty pointed beyond itself, that physical beauty reveals spiritual reality, and that beauty creates longing for something greater. In his memoir, Surprised by Joy, to Lewis, beauty awakened in him longing for something that he couldn't quite grasp. So, for example, that sunset that I had you imagine, a musical piece, an artwork, literature, and nature. All of these make you long for something, and Lewis would describe this longing as joy. Beauty is sacramental in the way that our visible beauty in our world points us to invisible reality. And creation is no longer material, but is symbolic. The world becomes enchanted again. I believe that this view of beauty solves the postmodern meaning crisis because life is not merely material anymore. We are not random accidents floating on a rock in space, but now beauty points to transcendence. It reminds us that we belong to something bigger. We belong to a story. We belong to God's story. And I think that that gives life a lot of meaning. So in conclusion, when we stopped discovering meaning in God and started creating meaning internally, the result was anxiety, isolation, confusion, and depression. But Lewis offers a better alternative. He says that meaning is not invented, that meaning is discovered. Through truth, we are anchored. Through goodness, we are guided. And through beauty, we are awakened to a sacramental reality. We were never meant to be the source of our own meaning. We were meant to discover that meaning was there all along. I want to end with my favorite C.S. Lewis quote that goes like this. If I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, then the only logical explanation is that I was created for another world. Thank you.
Phoebe, great job. This has been such a joy to watch you work through this piece. Last year when you came to me and said, okay, I've thought about what I want to research, something C.S. Lewis. I had no idea. This is what the Lord would do and lead you to, and this is quite fascinating. So well done, great work here. What I really appreciate about your work is you address many core life issues, right? What is man? What is man's purpose? What is it to know? What is reality? And you're wrestling with Lewis's thoughts very well and deeply. So thank you for your hard work, Phoebe. One thing I wanted to just start with, perhaps for the audience and the panel here, is your definition that you're using from Lewis of sacramental reality. I thought it would be really neat to hear from you. You were just defining it as meaning discovered versus invented, right? And something that is visible leading you to invisible reality. What specifically would you say is your definition of sacramental? Like, what's the sacramental aspect of it? I would just kind of want to hear you distill that down, if you could.
Yeah, so I would say a sacramental reality is anything in our world that people would say like is material that points to something else. So my examples in my presentation were just like something as, you could sort of say something as simple as a tree, or a sunset, or something beautiful in nature. I believe it points to something invisible that we can't quite grasp, that's like immaterial. Yeah.
Maybe I can just follow up on that. It was lovely reading this. I'm a huge Lewis fan. My son's middle name is Lewis, so that should say a lot. But maybe I can just follow up on this question. Why use the term sacramental instead of symbolic if the idea is the visible is pointing to the invisible? So how would you differentiate those terms?
Yeah, so the reason I use the word sacramental, kind of, you could use the Lord's Supper as an example. So I don't view the Lord's Supper simply as a symbol. Like, I think that there's something happening in the bread and the wine that you're holding. There's something happening here, there's something happening in a body of believers. So just as I wouldn't call the Lord's Supper merely a symbol, I would say that the world itself is sacramental. And I think it's more than a symbol. The Lord created it to be more than just a symbol, but to represent every beautiful thing that reflects Him. So yeah, that's why I would use sacramental.
Thank you.
Phoebe, Mr. Colstock already alluded to this, but I've sat on thesis panels now for 6 years, and yours is by far one of the best I've read from classical schools. But there are a couple points, I'll play the devil's advocate because that's my job this morning. And so on the material versus the immaterial, I want to ask you a question on that, as whether or not these are the right categories. So there's a very famous debate of a Christian apologist, Greg Bonson, versus an atheist. And the atheist was arguing immaterial things don't exist. But that atheist was also relying upon things of laws of logic, things like that. And so he asked Dr. Bonson, hey, give me an example of something immaterial that exists. And he goes, the laws of logic. And everyone laughs because Bonson just won the debate at that point. So there are immaterial things that we know that exist, like the laws of logic. So is it accurate to say that material things point to immaterial things, or should we have different categories for that? Like, do immaterial things like the laws of logic, do they point to something else, and that's where they find their meaning?
So you're asking me, like, if the material things on this earth should have a different category?
I'm asking, created things that are immaterial, how does that fit into your sacramental view? Like the immaterial things, like laws of logic, where do they find their meaning?
Could you say the question one more time? Sorry.
Okay, so your argument here is material things find their meaning because they point to something immaterial. What about immaterial created things, like laws of logic? Where do they find their meaning? Or do they just have self-meaning in themselves?
Yeah, so I think that things like that find their meaning, I would say maybe just in like the category that they're in. So like the way that God designed these things to be in our realities as invisible. And so I think that those things have their categories. I don't know if I can truly understand what category they should be in, because I can't quite grasp my mind around how, like, there's invisible sources of goodness that all of us just, like, have in us. So, yeah, I think I would say that I can't quite understand what category they would be in.
That's a good answer. You're always allowed to say, I don't know. I really liked that you brought out C.S. Lewis's emphasis on the medieval worldview versus the modern worldview. And I wonder if you could just articulate those two worldviews for us, explain the medieval worldview, why he thinks it's better, what things we might want to leave behind from it, and then explain the modern worldview.
So I would describe the medieval worldview as like ordered and cosmic. So the medievals thought that the universe was structured in a way where God almost had it all together in his hands, and it was placed there like with a purpose and a meaning. I would say that the modern worldview kind of is just chaos. So we kind of look at the universe as random, an accident, and not cosmic and like purposeful. Yeah.
Maybe describe more like, can you say more about why it had, why the medieval worldview still was connected to purpose? Like, why weren't they struggling with the meaninglessness that we are struggling with now, the anxiety, the depression? Like, what was it that made it still enchanted?
I think it was enchanted because they had all collectively an understanding that God had placed it there and put it there. And so it was cosmic because they knew that someone personal to them had put it there and placed it there for them to live. Yeah, I just think it's really, I think they would have been almost enchanted about it because they all knew who had put it there, and they knew that it had order and meaning.
I wonder if part of it is having to do with the fact that maybe the average medieval person didn't understand or thought they knew they didn't understand the mechanisms of, say, the human body or space or outer space, or the mechanisms of the things that we would call scientific discovery, which are true and real. There was a lot more mystery in their world, perhaps, and they could assign that mystery to God, because that's, and now I think the way science is conceived of, we assign everything to science. Like, well, we understand it, we can articulate how it works, and our articulation of how it works is a substitute for actually knowing where it comes from. Like, we think we know. Do you think there's a way to recapture that enchantment with all that science has sort of done for us, or the explanations that it gives us as a substitute for really God? How do we recapture some of that enchantment?
So I would say, like, scientific discovery, kind of understanding how the universe is structured and ordered, I think it even bring more meaning to people's lives if they had it under the lens of a personal creator made this for me. So, like, maybe they had more of an imagination to it because they didn't have scientific discovery, but I think it could just be as simple as we can be enchanted again because we understand it so fully, and we've looked into all the science that God has put for us to look and explore. So yeah, I think just putting it under the lens of a personal God made this for me to live in, for us to live in, instead of saying that it's just material, that it's just random. Yeah.
Let's pretend for a second that you're speaking with an atheist friend, colleague, family member, and they say, I don't want the world to have meaning. Right? There's actually very popular guys on TikTok arguing, make little jingles, and they make this argument all the time. It's good news that the world has no meaning. Let's just enjoy the theater of the absurd, as it were. So if you were talking to an unbeliever who said, I don't want life to have any meaning besides what I can create for it, how would you respond to that?
Yeah. So to that I would just say, well then, where does that get you? Like, if you want to create all of your own meaning and you want to live in sin, ultimately, like, you'll be happy for a little bit because living in sin is fun sometimes. But at the end of your life, where are you going to be if all you did was live for yourself, live for your passions? So to them, I would just say, like, at the end of your life, what are you truly going to reflect on if you didn't work for anything purposeful, if you just lived for yourself? So just reflect on how you're going to view your life when it ends, but also telling them there is a God who's going to judge you for what you do on earth. And creating meaning for yourself, in the end, doesn't serve any purpose other than yourself.
I'm curious, who would you like to read this paper? So who is your intended audience, and what would you want them to do with it?
Yeah, so I kind of wrote this paper for materialists, atheists, who don't view anything cosmic about the world. And I would want them to kind of glean that there's purpose and order to everything. I also would want them to reflect on how they would wrestle with beautiful things in this world, or how they would wrestle with the fact that they have a moral compass. Because I feel a lot of materialists don't have any groundings for how they believe in any morals. But I also kind of wrote this paper for maybe just the Christian who is just going about their life, they're going to church every Sunday, and doesn't view the world as like imaginative anymore. And for them to just hear it and realize that everything points to the God that they believe in, I think would be really impactful to them. But yeah, ultimately just the atheist materialist who doesn't connect like their wanting for like the transcendent. Yeah.
Maybe I can follow up on that. So your paper largely hinges on the idea that we all have a longing for the transcendent, correct? So, what would you say to the person, because Lewis deals with this in various places, Surprised by Joy talks about this, and also the Weight of Glory. What would you do with a person that denies that they have a longing for the transcendent?
So I think people who would deny that ultimately wouldn't be fully truthful with themselves, but also yeah, I would just say someone who says that they don't have a longing.
Maybe I can help you. Yeah. So in Surprised by Joy, Lewis talks about this is the dominant experience of his life before Christ, is this experience of joy. And then later in the book, he talks about I was so surprised when I talked to other people, and so many people didn't have the same experience. So maybe we can change the question a little bit. How would you seek to expose the longing in someone who said, I don't know what you're talking about?
So just maybe explaining to them, asking them how they felt when they were, maybe like they play sports, how they felt when they won like a big game, a big tournament, something like a joy that they couldn't quite explain. Or they were on the beach and they were watching the sunset, and like they're with their family and they can't quite grasp how beautiful something could be. Just having them reflect on these things that they would probably say, oh, that's just like material, like that's just how my brain works. So maybe just having them think deeper on how they feel when they experience beauty on this earth. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. You talk about the three transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty, and I think to a large extent the last generation or two of Christians have done a decent job on the first two, truth and goodness. I think we're starting to think about beauty, but we haven't done a great job on that yet. So maybe you can help all of us with this question. What is beauty, and is it objective?
Yeah, so I would say anything beautiful, or beauty is simply just anything that reflects God. I think beauty is objective, which is kind of a crazy thing to say in today's society, because it's like, well, I think that painting's beautiful, but you don't. But I would say that ultimately, like, if beauty's subjective, like, what do we get with it? Like, we have modern art where, like, just the canvas is, like, one color. And people are just generally like, well, that's not art. But when beauty's subjective, it is. So I would say it's objective because we need a standard to kind of grasp, but also it's objective because it's anything that reflects God and is kind of pointing to Him and the transcendent. Yeah, that's what I would say to that.
Is there any subjectivity to beauty? Is the subject involved in perceiving the objectivity of beauty?
Well, this kind of makes me think about the beginning of the abolition of man, where the two men are talking about the waterfall. And one of them says that it's sublime, and the other's like, well, I don't think it is. And so they leave, and it's like, is it still sublime? Like, is the waterfall still, like, pretty, if they're there, if they're not? So it makes me think about, I think the waterfall would stay being God's created thing, stay being sublime, if the men left, and if it was still there. So ultimately, I think beautiful things are there for us to look at, experience, but I don't think there's any subjectivity to it, because like, if the men leave the waterfall, it's still sublime.
Related to that, maybe it's, maybe you could talk about our capacity to understand beauty, like, culturally. So one culture might have, and it's oddly often related to their environment, but beauty might be super bright colors, super bright paintings, and another one would have a lot more subtlety to it. Sometimes I will look around at the palette of Minnesota and notice that that palette finds its way into our decorating. When you go to Arizona and that kind of red rock palette makes its way into their decorating. So maybe you could talk about our ability, our finitude and being able to appreciate all the beauty that's out there. Do you see what I mean?
Kind of. So, you're asking, could you repeat again what you're asking? Sorry.
What do you think about, I might come to something and say, I don't like the look of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I genuinely really don't like the look of it. But that may be related, and a whole group of people might feel that way. Every single person in this room might look at the decor in Sedona, Arizona and be like, nah. You know what I mean? But that could be related to our finitude. So there's a type of subjectivity happening that's really related to our finitude. We are just where we are in time and space. We just are in Minnesota. We haven't been exposed to everything that God made. So our perception of beauty could be small in that regard. So that's getting at the idea of subjectivity, but it's still affirming what you're saying about, it really is objective. We just aren't God. You see what I mean? We can't appreciate every single thing He's done the same way He does. Because our tastes are being formed to our our environment.
So you're just asking me to elaborate on that?
Yeah, do you grasp that piece of subjectivity? Like,
Yeah, I can see that. Like, being experienced to only one set thing that you would call beautiful, and then seeing something else that someone else would, and they would call that beautiful. But ultimately, I feel like there would be an objective.
for sure, but I think as you grasp that more and more, it may serve you as a tool when you're speaking to someone who looks at something and says, I don't get it, it's just not beautiful to me. Knowing that category will better help you draw that person into understanding the objectivity of beauty. Just as we understand people, we need to understand that people have tastes. Tastes are subjective. They're not altogether wrong or sinful, but they're formed by our environment. And so that category will help you, I think, better talk with peers and others who do look at something that you know is objectively beautiful and they don't see it. I think it'll help you get them there if you can speak to their tastes and help them understand their tastes.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, yeah.
So at Valor, we're talking about truth, goodness, and beauty daily, right? And ultimately, it's God Himself. And we want to know God. We want to know our Maker. So I know that you've studied this year in philosophy Descartes. And of course, most of us know him even if we don't know him, because we know the phrase, right? We know, I think, therefore I am. And so what I want to ask you is what you think, where does Lewis land as far as the spectrum of what is it to know this reality of the transcendentalists? How, in light of this discussion of beauty, of leading someone to beauty, how does someone, according to Lewis, come to know this reality? How would you articulate it versus, so you're taking Descartes as like thought is versus like the spectrum of like a metaphysical realist that would say, no, being is. We assert being is. Where does Lewis fall on that? And then in light of where you land there, how does that then kind of bring you back to knowing beauty in the sense that it's objective?
So how would someone come to know Lewis's view? Is that what the question is?
Yeah, so where would you say he falls, like in the spectrum of say, like thought is or being is, right? Like, is it beautiful because I think it is, or is it beautiful because it is? And then how do you get to know that? Like, what is that? How do you get to that place of participating with that beauty? It's the same sort of question, just rephrased and trying to dig a little deeper based upon what I know you've studied and what some of the things you've thought on.
Yeah, so I think Lewis would say to truly know things is to first, I would say, go to God, go to His Word, but also I think he has a lot of thoughts on like the way that we think about things. And so knowing how our thoughts kind of operate, I think would be an important aspect of it.
Could you maybe mention meditations from the tool shed and that distinction of knowledge?
Yeah, so Lewis has this essay, it's called Meditations at a Tool Shed, where he talks about two ways of knowing or seeing. So he's in this tool shed, and there's a beam of light coming in. And he says that you could either gaze upon it. So gazing upon the beam of light would be to studied its angle, right? Like the formula about how the sun hits the shed at the perfect angle and how the sun shines in. And so this is kind of more how modern people would view seeing things or knowing things as like material, something we can study. But he explains this other way, where it's to like step into the beam of light and actually like be in it and kind of awaken your mind into seeing things how God would see them, seeing truth, goodness, and beauty how he would see them. And Lewis says that this is more of like an enchanted way of knowing, is to actually step into the beam of light as opposed to just gazing at it and trying to study it as like it's a formula.
I think what you're dealing with is what we all deal with, which is beauty is something really, really hard to nail down, right? But it's something when you encounter a surpassing expression of it, it's obvious, right? Like so a few years ago, Emily and I went out to Zion National Park. And as you go around, everybody, believe it or not, is awestruck by the beauty. And the troublemaker in me just wanted to go elbow everyone and say, that's just pointless rocks and dirt put together. But nobody acts that way when they see it, because they're overwhelmed with the beauty of it. It's like there are no atheists in foxholes. There really are no atheists when they encounter a surpassing expression of beauty. So I think you're definitely on the right path on all that. I'm going to shift gears here. I'm going to read you a quote from your paper and ask you a question. You wrote, medieval men may have been inaccurate about astronomy and medicine, but one thing they were not wrong about was that the world was hierarchical and theological. All right? Those two words, hierarchical and teleological, can you define that? What is that?
It's like hierarchical, I would say, is everything has order and like a set meaning to it. So they believe that the universe was perfectly structured and that God had placed it there perfectly. I would say teleological is describing that everything has an end or a chief end. So like a chair, its telos would be to sit in it, or your cup of water would be to drink it. So the universe being hierarchical and teleological is that God made it to be ordered and structured, but he also made it with his plan to restore it and to come back one day and reign on it.
Are there any ways in particular that you see the hierarchical element of how God made the world degraded right now? Like, what are the areas where that in particular you think this is one spot we really need to get back to order and hierarchy?
I think you could look at the institution of marriage right now as something that I think is really, really damaged, because we kind of went from accepting that it was a man and a woman was like God's ultimate design, what he made for the world, and that it had a purpose, and like there was something really meaningful towards it or for it. And I think where we've gone now is just saying like, well, what is even the point of marriage? Like, if we don't have any set rules for what married people should do, then what's the point of it? We're just changing what marriage even is. I would say, yeah, that's a big one, because I think it hurts people in our society all the time. Like, it hurts single people looking for people to date or marry. And a lot of people's thinking is like, well, I don't even want to marry because what's the point of it, you know? So yeah, I think that's something that's really damaged, and our society doesn't really have like a idea of what the goal of it is or what its chief end would be.
I see on your bibliography you've read the atheist strength. I'm curious, you can either answer this from Lewis's perspective or from your own perspective. Is materialism really the problem that we face, the biggest problem that we face today? Like not 50 years ago when Lewis was writing, but now.
Yes, I think materialism kind of like restructures everything, reframes everything, and ultimately makes us not be ordered towards anything. And so I think a lot of the meaningless and purposelessness of our world today is that belief in materialism and kind of just believing that nothing has transcendent purpose or meaning. Yeah.
So, from your experience with your generation and from just your experience, would you say that most people view the world as nothing but stuff, or that they're looking in the wrong places for meaning? So there's a difference between saying everything's meaningless and looking in other places for meaning. I'm thinking about particularly, that's kind of vague, I'm thinking about particularly the rise of paganism, neo-paganism. There's a whole host of spiritual practices that are being embraced. So I'm just curious from your perspective, do you really think it's that people view the world as nothing but stuff, or that they're going to other places, other entities, in order to find meaning?
Yeah, so I think like it might be hard for you to find someone who's like, everything is just stuff, everything has no purpose, everything has no meaning, because I think everyone who lives on this earth knows that there's like at least something pointing to meaning. But I think what a lot of people in my generation are doing is like seeing this kind of spiritual aspect of our reality and kind of just trying to follow that a little bit, but with like no responsibility. So like there's a lot of people who are like really into crystals and rocks and praying to other things that don't have any like inherent like true meaning to them, but it makes them feel connected to something that they can like probably like sense and feel, is that there's an immaterial aspect of our reality, but ultimately what they're doing is kind of searching for that meaning and trying to fulfill it, but while they're trying to fulfill it, also not really wanting to submit to any sort of moral order to the world, and also not really any consequences.
We're running out of time here. I want to ask you one more question. Thank you so much, panelists. Here you are, you're in front of your classmates. They've seen how well you've done defending this thesis. They know that writing this thesis is going to be difficult. They know that defending it one day is going to be difficult, and someday you're all going to stand and defend your senior thesis. So, Phoebe, what would you tell them about the experience of writing this thesis, and why you enjoyed it, and why they should look forward to it?
So I would say it was really fun to kind of pick something that I was interested in. I really, really loved diving into Lewis because I think he's really cool in the way that he understands the world but he also wrote like children's literature, and he has so much vast work that I thought was really fun to go into. I would also say it gave me a lot of discipline because, I mean, Mrs. Thorne came to me about this like a year ago. And it was just like, oh, okay, so I have a year to do something. It's like, that's so long. But when you really think about it, like, you need a structure when you're gonna work on it. You need to know, like, how you're gonna defend it. You need to order the paper. Like, that was really hard. I had like 20 drafts of my paper, trying to work out the order, work out what I was even trying to defend. Like, it's so hard to truly condense everything into something that makes sense. Because I was like, oh, I think this is done. And then I was talking to Mr. Colstock, and he was like, this should be ordered differently. And I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense now. Because it's just like, to me, I've been wrestling with it for so long, but just ordering it the way I had to was so hard. And so I think it created a lot of discipline in me, just knowing when I was going to work on it, finding time to work on it throughout my schoolwork was also hard. So just good time management, good discipline. Yeah.
Thank you, Phoebe. Let's give her a round of applause. Really well done. I count it an honor to have gotten to be your humanities teacher for 1 year. I hope all my students can defend theses like that. Students, follow Phoebe as she follows Christ. Seek wisdom, like Phoebe's been seeking wisdom. And consider her thesis. I think the universe really is sacramental, and I hope she convinced you. To celebrate, we've got a little gift for you. Phoebe, would you give that to her, Mrs. Thorne? We've got a wonderful set of books that have been donated for you. Very well done. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for taking time this morning. Students, you are dismissed to go seek wisdom. God be with you.